I just want to say welcome to all of you for joining us this morning. It's wonderful to have you. This is a special session. It's the last session of ADIS, and so it's just wonderful to see all of you with us. I also wanted to just say that this session, the last session of ADIS, is sponsored by Facebook. Thank you, Samhar and team, for your partnership and for being a part of our journey. Everything we do at ADN is supported by our funders because the work we do requires a lot of hard work and it requires a lot of funding. Whatever the money we get, we use it to make sure that you receive the best service possible. We're never perfect, but we try to do the best we can to bring people together. Really, our commitment is to bring Africans and Friends of Africa together to make a difference in the continent and the communities in which we live. These two things are connected to any diaspora. We cannot support the continent unless we are supporting the communities where we live. This is critical because the diaspora, in so many ways, is also a reflection of where we live and what we contribute to the communities in which we live. So I'm very grateful to be in the Valley, where we not only just support each other and bring our communities together, but also really we get to form partnerships that is going to make a difference in the continent, but also here in our communities. I wanted to just give special thanks to all the generous support, our funders. All of those will be shared with you by Megan shortly, but let me just say this. The African Diaspora Network has 4 programs. One of them is the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, where we bring leaders from around the world to join us. And we do this in person every year in Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to pivot to virtual convening. And I'm very, very proud to say that that worked. And we actually been able to run probably about 10 sessions last year, of which 7 of them are for the African Diaspora Investment Symposium. And the second program is the Impact and Innovation Forum. This goes on throughout the year in Silicon Valley, Washington, and New York. But we hope to do that next year. I'm not sure whether we can go to Washington again this year and New York, but that's how it was created. The third one, and the one that we're also very proud of, is the Builders of Africa's Future. It was created in 2018 to make sure that we were not just bringing people together, but we also wanted to make sure that we were benefiting grassroots entrepreneurs in the continent. And so far in our pipeline, we have about 42, and we're very proud of the last 11 that took the awards on January 27th. We have about 11 of them, and we were able to raise money. Even if it's humble money, we were able to raise for the first time to really give them some award in financial format. The last one is called the Force, and we hope to stop there and do the best we can to make sure these programs are successful. It's called the Builders of America's Future. It really is created to support diasporans and our historical African diaspora entrepreneurs. So this is really to support US-based, Black-led organizations, enterprises, mainly in the startup area. So we will share with you more details as we know, but I have great news to share that we actually have a lead funder to develop and launch the program. We had a seed funding from Silicon Valley Community Foundation, and now we have a lead funder. We also have a lead funder for the Builders of Africa's Future for 2022. We want to thank the Conrad Hilton Foundation and USADF. They have already committed to support the entrepreneurs in 2022. I'm also going to mention a little bit about the other programs that we will do, but we'll share with you the information about the Builders of America's Future. The press release will go out on the 23rd, so I don't want to be ahead of that. So I'll just wait for that to come out. The other thing I'm going to say before I give it to Megan is I want to thank our speakers today. We're very grateful to have you, and I am very, very delighted to see E after a few years. He was one of the first people who supported ADN in 2017 for the 2017 African Diaspora Investment Symposium. It's wonderful to have you. I know that you're doing some great work, and I look forward to working with Future Africa to support the builders of Africa's future. So we'll share with you our partnership plans, and very happy to have you. Nicole, you're new to us, and we're very happy that you will be a part of the ADN community. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for participating. Samhar, I don't see you in my screen, but thank you for leading the session today. And Nicole, great to see you. And we're looking forward to hearing from each and every one of the speakers. But before I do that, I'll just share, have Megan share with all of you a brief screen so she can share some of the success stories of the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, as this is the last one. So it's just a couple of bullet points, slides that she will share. Megan, it's all yours.
Thanks, Almaz. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everyone see okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here is just a brief impact report. So as far as ADIS engagement this year, in July, we spoke about the private sectors. In August, we talked about healthcare. September was digital connectivity. October was innovation and investment hubs. November, our most recent one, was investment in education. And altogether, as far as people who attended, we had an engagement of 1,445 people, which is pretty great. Thank you all for participating. And some organization updates. Sorry, I'm just closing some windows so I can see better. There we go. We have 2 full-time employees, myself and Almaz right now, and 5 contractors. We have 40+ countries represented in the network. Builders of Africa's Future, which occurred in January, we awarded 11 entrepreneurs. We had seed funding raised for the BAFs of 60K, and 50K of that came from USADF, and 10K came from the Conrad Hilton Foundation, and we're very grateful for that. And the BAFs definitely were as well. For the 2021 Impact and Innovation Forums, that's gonna coming up real soon in March, and it'll go into October. And then just Builders of America's Future, which Almaz already touched on, that will be launching sometime in July 2021. And then just the last note here. We just want to thank all of our funders who have helped ADIS really come to life, and we couldn't have done it without you. And then on to Innovation and Payments in Africa, which is funded by Facebook. We really appreciate you partnering with us, and Samhar, it's been great working with you.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you. Now at this stage is to Nicole. Nicole, take it on.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be here. Ian and I are looking forward to talking a little bit about his background as an entrepreneur and his vision for the future of Africa. I think we're also going to be taking some questions from the audience. So if you have any, please feel free to submit them, and we'll be trying to kind of look through those as we go through this discussion. So we can, yeah, capture any details from him that you all would like to hear. So without further ado, hi E, how are you doing today?
Very, very well. Thank you so much for having me on here today.
It's really a pleasure. You've been part of this community longer than I have, but I am really excited to get more involved. And it was great hearing from Megan and Almaz about all the awesome progress, especially under such tricky circumstances with the pandemic. So yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a it's an understatement to say that you've had an illustrious career so far as an innovator in Africa.
Well,
I think there are lots of people who are on this call here at this convening who are aware of some of the things that you've done. But I think it would be really nice for us to get a little sense of backstory as well. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your childhood and how the circumstances that you grew up in kind of affected the path that you've taken. And looking back, are there sort of decisive moments that really defined what's important to you?
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thanks again for having me here. And I always love these extremely deep questions. And thank you, Almas. Thank you, Megan, for keeping this going. Almas never ceases to remind me that I gave a tiny seed check for the first ADIS conference a long time ago. And it's just amazing to see how the organization has evolved to just become a huge bedrock of our community in the Bay. Although I'm calling you guys now from the motherland, closer to Lagos, I'm just super excited. And just to the two questions you asked, I was born not very far from here, literally a few minutes from where I'm sitting right now. And I grew up in this neighborhood. So I went to school down the street by the railway compound. And then when I was 10, my dad made a decision to move out down south to the Niger Delta. And I moved with him, but I had to go to boarding school because my parents had me enrolled in a Jesuit boarding school called Loyola Jesuit College, which was pretty prestigious at the time, and just kind of like a school for gifted kids. But I would say, just overall, I think the major kind of big points of lessons I really picked up from childhood. My parents were clergy. They still are. So my father leads the third largest church in the country. And for him and for my family, life was primarily about service and sacrifice. There was nothing else really to life if you couldn't sacrifice for other people and help them, get ahead in some way, shape, or form. And I was also incredibly privileged because my parents, by virtue of them having had an education, were able to leverage that education to build amazing lives for themselves. Neither of my parents were particularly well-to-do in our society. My father was a butcher. My grandfather was a butcher on my father's side, and my mother's father, my grandfather on my mother's side, was a missionary. And both my grandmothers were traders and housewives. So it's just remarkable to kind of see the progress that has taken place between when they lived and now my parents, they lead the largest church in the country, alongside my mother. And before that, my father had a pretty illustrious career at Shell. So I think first of all, for me, what that taught me was, at the end of the day, what we're all working for, fighting for, or trying to make possible is a world where anybody, regardless of where they come from, what family they're born in, has an opportunity to live a very purposeful life and to make money doing so, right? So I think that's really at the core. But I would say like there are three moments that really kind of defined how I think about the world in my childhood. I think the first moment was really kind of how we grew up. And I've told this story in a TEDx thing before. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a taxi driver or a policeman. And the funny story behind that is that my parents, my father, when we were growing up, he hadn't yet had a job. When I was very, very young, he didn't have a job. So he had to drive a taxi to kind of make ends meet. And the only, he took cash from passengers, and sometimes he would have us in front with the nicer passengers who would insist that, wouldn't think it weird that some kid was, sitting there. And then the only people he would give that money to were the policemen who were trying to extort him. So I thought that was how the world worked. And you know, the only people who made money in the world, because that was all I could see, were taxi drivers and policemen. And all the bankers wearing nice suits and all of that just kind of went to a nice air-conditioned office and came back. And because I couldn't see the cash, I thought they didn't make any money. But I think it really kind of shaped my thought process when I reflect about it, about value, because, you know, value is in all the things you don't see, right? The things that are not obvious to you. So that was one really big lesson I learned. The second one was, you know, really actually a fairly tragic event, to be quite honest. I was in SS2, so 5th grade, I guess, is what you guys would call it. And, you know, we're all going to this extremely elite school. I was very lucky to be there. Definitely wasn't as smart as many of the kids there, or as wealthy, you know, and, but we got in, and we thank God for that. And, you know, we were having the time of our lives at the school. And, you know, one December, you know, very slight, I wouldn't call it a mistake in hindsight, but it was just kind of just like a twist of fate. And, you know, I was supposed to go on a flight the day before. You know, I was supposed to go on a flight the morning of. I missed the flight, and I decided to take another flight back home. And the flight I was supposed to take in the morning crashed with 60 kids. And I think that just changed my perspective of life, you know, in many ways. Because, you know, coming back to school after that, you know, seeing my name in the manifest as, you know, passed away, because I was on the manifest, you know, and all that, you know, that changes your perspective about who gets to live and who gets to die and why. And I think for me, I like to joke that I've been a dead man since that day. So at this point, I'm living on borrowed time. So it really changes my perspective about risk, and it's really taught me a lot about what it means to live, to take risk, and that we all just here, you know, I don't know how many people believe in God, but we're all here serving at the pleasure of some big man in the sky who's decided to give us an extra day. And so, you know, you try your best to make it count as much as you can. That was a very big formative experience for me. And I'll say the third one was, you know, I went to university. I had a very interesting university experience because I went to University of Waterloo in Canada, which is very famous for, you know, on-the-job education. And, you know, I remember the first day I got into University of Waterloo. There was this kid, his name is Pierre. He had long hair, Polish-French kid, you know them. And then he asked me, you know, hey, can I stay at your house tonight? And I was like, that's weird. Oh, well, I guess you can. And that's how we became really good friends. But now, you know, we had this thing called cooperative education. So we would cycle in and out on alternate terms. So I lost touch with him. And then one day I was running the school newspaper at this time. And I kind of come out to grab a pizza for lunch. And Pierre, someone taps me, is like, E, what's going on? And I see Pierre, and I'm like, dude, where have you been all these years? And he, you know, tells me this amazing story about Silicon Valley and what's going on. And we catch up over lunch, and we start to hang out a lot. And he introduced me to this part of campus called the Velocity Residence. So apparently, and this is the funniest thing, because you could have gone to Waterloo 6 years and never heard, or 4 years or 5 years, and never heard about this place. But there was apparently a residence for entrepreneurs. And he took me there and was like, this is where I live in this residence. There's just all these entrepreneurs. And there was some, to be honest, you know, the friendships in Velocity, some of them was amazing, because there were someone like Ted Livingston, who was the founder of Kick, was living there. There was a guy, Ali Reza, you know, the guys who founded some of this wristwatch company. There's a number of very, very high profile founders today. Back then, they weren't high profile; they were just kids who all lived in this house. But it really opened my eyes, because, you know, I'd always looked at the internet as something that some white people somewhere else in the world did, and the rest of us were just supposed to accept it and manage it. And so being in this situation where, you know, it was more than that. It wasn't, you know, you actually had an opportunity to create this thing. Was absolutely amazing, and it you know, it really gave me a window into what was possible with technology and the internet. And so, we would watch The Social Network, the movie, which really inspired us, and then we would try and go and build a technology startup myself in Pierre. But I would say, the experience that really kind of fully flipped my mindset when it came to entrepreneurship and what was possible with entrepreneurship was, one day we used to have this joke with Velocity that, you would work at Velocity from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. because that was the bus route. That was when the buses ran. So if you missed the 5 a.m. bus, then you wouldn't go home. You know what I mean? And if you missed the 9 p.m. bus at night, if you missed the 5 a.m. bus, you wouldn't be able to get to work on time. And if you missed the 9 p.m. bus, you wouldn't be able to come back home. And I remember arriving at the office at 5 a.m. in the morning, and my office was cordoned off. And to be honest, at that time, Waterloo had a bit of problem with like mental health with a lot of founders and stuff. So I thought maybe somebody else had tried to take their life. But I just went to Tim Hortons and tried to wait until the police cars and all of that were out. And so when I came, when people started streaming into the coffee shop, and I, my friend streamed into the coffee shop and was like, dude, have you heard what happened? And he was like, I was like, yeah, what happened? I saw the place was cordoned off. I hope everyone's okay. And he was like, no, look, this guy who sat right beside me at Velocity, I just sold this company to Google for $30 million. And we're like, what? And it's a very surreal experience because this guy's right beside you. He's not somebody you read about in the newspaper. You kind of see him dealing his emails, blowing his nose, eating full with you, so, like he's not like a superhuman guy. And just watching that acquisition, I think flipped my mind because I was like, if this guy was sat just right beside me could do this, I don't have an excuse not to do it. And I mean, again, there's probably many other stories I could tell, but I would say, just piecing all that together, it really, understanding that many people limit the world to what they see. And I think that's the biggest challenge with our people, it's just like the world is way bigger. There's so much going on around you that you can't see, but it's way more significant. You know what I mean? And then understanding that everything you have is really by the grace of God, and you're just living borrowed time every time, right? So your job is to pay down whatever you have to make that time count. And then, recognizing the power of friendship and the power of getting in with the right kind of crew from very early on in life really does set you on the right trajectory. And then finally, seeing the success of your peers inspires you to do just about as well as they have, or at least lets you know it's possible for you to do just about as well as they have. And I think those are really the experiences that have kind of shaped my worldview through childhood up till now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing those. That's a lot of interesting details. I think I hear a lot of themes of service and sacrifice and leading a community. But it's clear that one that really stands out is kind of a sense of ownership over outcomes and your agency and your ability to kind of affect what happens to you and affect what happens to others. And I guess I'd be interested to know kind of, since you've had one foot on either side of the pond, in the sense you've lived in the US, you've lived in Canada, you've been back in Nigeria, you've gone back and forth. How do you think about how the diaspora can play a more catalytic role in outcomes and can feel that kind of rush of the ability to improve things and change things and affect them, rather than just saying, well, this is kind of how things are and I'm gonna stay in my lane and stay in my sort of assumed role? How do you think about
that? I mean, it's something I think about a lot. I always joke that the diaspora will save Africa. So I think it's, first of all, it's a function of, when you think about it from a framework perspective, you live in the societies we want to be, right?
Yeah.
And so every day you're reminded of, on the one hand, what doesn't exist where you're coming from, right? And on the other hand, what is possible if we work together to make it happen, right? And I think that's the tension that diaspora sometimes has to bear. And it can be very torturous because on the one hand, you can see all this development in the West and be like, wow, what day will my country be able to, have this level of, governance or, level of transparency or level of service. And then on the other hand, and it can be incredibly frustrating to compare that country to your country And then you kind of just go ballistic, like, why do I have to deal with this and all that stuff? But you see, I think one way I've been able to kind of tie the connections is history, right? And I've had the good fortune of seeing a lot of ecosystems start and grow. And I recognize that all things take time, but beyond things taking time, things don't happen except you make them happen, right? History is not just something that people make, like, that just is a guaranteed tape recording of life, right? People actually have to be very determinist and go intervene and make things happen. And so, I mean, because of that, and because of that thinking, one of the things I've kind of internalized when it comes to diaspora engagement in Africa, is that ability to kind of bring back capital in three forms, right? Because it's not just one form of capital. There's money, because the reality of the fact is our governments do not have the resources to develop on their own. And no one's going to give them the resources to develop on their own. And most of the people who claim to want to help them get those resources don't have a clue what actually needs to get invested in, and no one has any vested interest in doing the right things to make sure that the right kind of infrastructure is being built. So I'll give you a practical example. If you combine the capital budget of Nigeria and Kenya, right, it is still half of New York City's capital budget. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
you're really living in a country where, even if the government was 100% honest, right, they don't have the resources to make infrastructure happen. And so we have to get very innovative about how we actually redesign and leapfrog development. And that's where the second kind of capital is extremely important, right? And that's human capital, right? A lot of people don't know how to do stuff. A lot of people don't have the knowledge to do stuff back home. And it's not because they're dumb or they don't know what they're doing or they're backwards because they choose to be, right? It's because they just don't know. And thanks to the internet, we can have an interaction like this with our diaspora. And I can only imagine what would happen if the roles were reversed and I was able to learn how things could work. I'm sure we'll have those opportunities with Almaz and with Megan. But I mean, the whole idea is we now have this medium, for educating, and there should be more, our diaspora can play a more active role in educating, right? We don't need a credential to educate. We don't need to be invited back to university to educate. It can be as simple as getting a few young people interested in your line of work together. When young people reach out to you because they admire your work, responding to their messages and giving them some direction, investing a little bit in them, things like that. Extremely important. Buying a laptop. Every time I go to speak now, I say, look, if you want me to come speak, buy a laptop for a kid in Africa. Just buy a laptop. I've seen laptops change people's lives, right? So things like that, it helps a lot. And then the final thing is social capital. The reality is, the way the world works, we need advocates. Everybody needs advocates. And, fortunately or unfortunately, most of the power is on your side of the pond, not ours, right? Like, so there's a lot of work our diaspora can do to educate people on the other side about the need to invest in Africa, the need to open up opportunities to Africans, right? There's a lot of social capital by connecting through human capital interactions, by connecting on the social capital level. People can be given access to opportunities and to resources that they need to be able to grow, in every way. So I think our diaspora, like I said, we are depending on you guys to save us because you're where we want to be, right? You know how those societies work. But it's very critical that we think about it as more than just sending money home, right? It's also making sure you're bringing people along with you. It's also making sure that you're building relationships that can uplift all of us. And we've had an amazing diaspora, to be honest. I'll tell you for free. There's so many stories in startup lore in Nigeria. I can say for Nigeria, where without the intervention of diaspora at critical junctures in the deal, you wouldn't see the big, $100 million stories that you're having today. People had to speak for us in specific places to make this future you're seeing possible. So again, lots, a very, very important role to play.
To everyone, greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Samhar Araya, and I am the head of Diaspora Public Policy for Facebook's Africa, Middle East, and Turkey Public Policy team. I'm based in New York, and for those of you who have not had the chance to really engage with, you know that I want you to know how deeply focused and invested I am and we are on the role of the African diaspora in driving Africa's economic, social, and civic growth. Today's conversation, we're going to do a deep dive into an examination of what innovation, inclusion, and digital payments means for Africa and what companies, big and small, are doing to help widen that space and drive financial inclusion throughout the continent and with the diaspora, with and for the diaspora as well. Before we begin, I'd just like to share a couple thoughts on why this is important to Facebook, why we are here not just as a sponsor, but as a partner. And hopefully we can have a robust discussion with you all today. For our work, the role of the diaspora is not considered as an add-on or an afterthought. It is actually a very integral part to our work on the continent, as well as in the Middle East and Turkey and globally. It is clear that the diasporas are critical stakeholders in driving growth and prosperity on the continent, and also in the communities where they reside. And for Facebook, we understand the role that our platform and our products play in helping diasporas connect communities, amplify voice, offer new ideas and creativity and innovation, the transfer of knowledge capital and social capital, as was discussed earlier in the fireside chat. We understand the role that we play in helping you connect online and digitally. And so what we realized very quickly was while Facebook's work on the continent continued to focus in deep collaboration and long-term investment with local communities, in partnership with governments, and looking at a long-term vision for how we can support this growth and prosperity, we understood right away that the diasporas are a part of that ecosystem. And just like the African Union recognizes the diaspora as a sixth region, so too do we consider the African diaspora as an extension of the African continent. But we also know that there is a very nuanced and specific set of needs, challenges, and opportunities that many of us in the diaspora face. And so in presenting this work, we're also building out what diaspora public policy's priorities are specific to the experiences of those of us in the diaspora. I myself am a member of the Eritrean diaspora, born and raised in the States, lived extensively in Eritrea and throughout the continent for many years. So I've had sort of the understanding and experience of the challenges of being here and there and nowhere at the same time, but tons of ideas, tons of desires, and how we implement that. So today's conversation is exploring where we find the nexus between driving inclusion and innovation on the continent, and where the diasporas fit in that. And we're looking at this through fintech and financial inclusion efforts as a whole, and including our lens on the role that digital payment systems have had as well. So I'd like to now, before we begin the conversation, just a couple of housekeeping items. I know you all have tons of questions. I did hear conversations at the top of the hour. We would invite you to please type out your questions in the chat. We will have an audience Q&A segment after the moderated discussion. And the panelists, I think we've got all of them here. I just want to check and make sure. We may have lost one, but if the panelists could turn their screens on, we will begin by a brief round of introductions from our panelists. If you could all, we'll do this alphabetically by last name, I think, just because everyone's in different parts of the Zoom screen. If we could begin with beginning with last names, I think Adeyemi would be our first panelist. Please state your title, your occupation, and you know what? One icebreaker, because I think we've all been Zooming forever. Please share one positive aspect of this virtual life that we've all become accustomed to, that you've experienced. Can we start with you?
Sure thing. Always a fan and not a fan of having a last name that begins with A, because that meant the teacher got to me first.
Yep.
So you're getting to me first as well. Hi everyone, my name is Omoshalewa Adeyemi, but I go by O. I head the Global Partnerships and Expansion team for Flutterwave. I'll talk more about Flutterwave as we dive into the panel, but in summary, we're a fintech payment technology company facilitating the acceptance and disbursement of payments for both businesses and individuals. I've been with the company since 2017, based in the US, but of course, largely working facing the African continent. Icebreaker, one good thing that's come out of not being on the road as much. Prior to COVID and all the madness last year, I think I spent about 90% of my time on the African continent, traveled quite a bit. I've been fortunate to visit a number of African countries. I love to travel, so always loved that part of the job. I was sad to slow down on travel, but very happy because I recently had a baby about 5 months ago, and COVID has kind of been a blessing in disguise because I get to be at home with him and just watch him. So that's been great.
That is wonderful. Thank you, O. We will move to our next friend, my colleague, my dear friend, Kojo, please. I think you're on mute, Kojo.
Always helps if you unmute. Hi everyone. My name's Kojo. I just want to say a quick thanks to those of you involved in the last conversation. I caught like the last 20 minutes of it, and it was a fantastic conversation to listen into, so appreciate that. My name's Kojo. I'm Director of Public Policy with Facebook for the Africa region. Been with Facebook about 4.5 years, largely on connectivity, and now looking after all the policy issues with my fantastic team. Good things from one good thing. It's hard to find the good in such a bad experience for the globe, both from a kind of health and economic point of view. And I'm with O on the ability to slow down, although I got to the point just before Christmas where I really started missing traveling and being on the continent. I think the one good thing is that people have realized how important tech is going to be, and tech is. I think we had champions across the continent, especially entrepreneurs and CSOs and many policymakers, but I think we have a much stronger, tighter consensus on the need to move the continent forward with regard to its connectivity, which was part of the last conversation, but also how we use that connectivity, which I hope is part of this one. So really pleased to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Kojo. We do have our third panelist if we went in alphabetical order, but I think we briefly lost the connection with him, so we're trying to locate him. But let's move on to our next panelist, Francine. If you could introduce yourself and the one takeaway that you can hold on to as a positive.
Hi, I'm Francine Dove, and I am a project manager at DMA Global. I'm based in Accra, and I think a positive from the pandemic has been my company has always worked remotely, so I think it's a better work-life balance as more people are working remotely, understanding that you need to kind of have that separation and segmentation.
That's great. That is great. It's always important to put things in perspective, knowing that this pandemic has placed severe strain on many of our lives around the world, and the challenges are ever present. But we want to ensure and remind ourselves that this year's the coming weeks, months, and years, that our perspective, we should hold on to all the good as much as possible. We have one more panelist. I'm going to check and see if he's been able to reconnect and give him the opportunity. Hopefully he'll be able to join us. Yamiru, are you on the Zoom? Have you been able to reconnect?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and please state we've asked to share your title, your occupation, and one positive aspect of living virtually that you have experienced.
Well, thank you, Samhar. My name is Yamrut Anelo. I'm from Ethiopia. My company is Moneta Technologies, and we have a brand called Amole. We are doing more of on the payment sector and commerce. One positive thing about well, we get to see all this community in technology and in Zoom and all those different networks. So we used to travel and we used to do one-on-one bilateral type of things. Now we see a whole community of people that we could interact with. Although that every day seems to be longer and longer, the time that we work. And as you know, today for me in Addis right now, it's 8 o'clock. So the day's still going. So it's nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I should note, our panelists truly are globally based. This is my positive from the COVID pandemic reality, is that we have found ways to connect with people who are thousands of miles away without having to travel. Of course, I love traveling as well, but this is fantastic. And just to note, we have Francine calling in from Ghana. Kojo is based in London. O is based in California. And Yamiro is calling from Addis, and I'm from New York. So we've got truly global and diasporic representation, which is fantastic. Before I begin, one more housekeeping item. If everyone could, if you're on a laptop, I strongly recommend that you adjust your settings so you can see the speaker up front on Zoom. I suggest select, you click view in the upper right-hand corner of your computer screen and select speaker. That way the person, as they are sharing their thoughts, will pop up on your screen, as opposed to some of the headache of Zoom, but just a suggestion. Okay, so now I believe you should be pinned. That's right. Okay, so today's conversation, let's jump into it. We've got a really huge topic, and these companies and partners are doing incredible work. The idea of inclusion, innovation, and driving payments towards Africa is one that we're all very interested in technology, through technology, social media, and digital payment systems. The recent advent of companies and organizations and entrepreneurs has made it possible for advancements in financial inclusion and has eliminated significant barriers for local communities, users everywhere, including the diaspora. Through investments in digital literacy, financial inclusion and connectivity, and advancements with mobile phones and the adoption of digital payment systems, the market has become much more accessible to traditionally underserved and underrepresented users, including women, small businesses, and diaspora stakeholders. And it's also made significant impact in opening up markets and driving growth throughout the continent. So today we're going to explore what our companies like Flutterwave, Facebook, Amole, and DMA Global doing to drive innovation and drive digital and financial inclusion in the fintech space for Africa. And what role does the diaspora play in this? Also, we're going to explore what are the challenges and opportunities, what does the landscape look like for our panelists to widen the fintech space and drive more growth in Africa. So we'll get started with sort of a deeper dive into each of your work. I'd like each of you to spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes on this question to give our audience a greater understanding of your work and the focus you have in this space. Please tell us, what are your companies doing to help drive innovation and inclusion in Africa? Kojo, if it's great, given our role as partners here, I would love for you to share light on what Facebook is doing to drive inclusion and innovation on the continent.
Yeah, I can certainly try. 2 minutes might not be enough, so forgive me if I speak quite quickly and try and get something out. I think it starts with how we view the continent. I mean, if you look at the work that my team does as the Africa Public Policy team, and you look at the mission we have, and this is beyond Facebook's mission of giving people the power to connect, making the world, bringing the world together. I think our mission is to co-create opportunity. And we've been quite frank for a while that we believe that's creating opportunity for Africans and therefore for Africa, but also for Facebook. And that's for Facebook to invest in driving forward and playing its role in moving the continent forward from a socio-economic development point of view. And I'm quite frank actually about Facebook's business model, which not everybody understands. And I know most people on this, if not all people on this call will, but you'll still be surprised that there are many that don't understand that Facebook's revenue isn't derived from selling people's data or from phone calls on WhatsApp or whatever it might be. And I've heard many suggestions as to how the company makes money. It's from advertising. And anyone knows that advertisers want to advertise to people who will buy their products. And the more money an advertiser will spend is directly correlates with how much of their products will be bought, or it needs to revenue gathered for that product. So it's in Facebook's interests, to cut a long story short, to develop or help to develop or play its role in developing a continent in which people have purchasing power and then become attractive to advertisers. And we see that as a really important part of this co-creation of opportunity for Africa and Africans, but also for the company. The byproduct of trying to co-create an opportunity is the investment we're making. And I think at a structural, foundational level, the investments we've made, certainly in my time with Facebook, which is now going 5 years in internet connectivity and infrastructure and getting services to people who otherwise wouldn't have internet services, and that's including free services like Free Basics and Flex that people may be familiar with, but also the ones like Instagram and WhatsApp and whatever else in special deals with some of our mobile operator partners is a really important part of that. But when you look at the big investments we've made, even in the last year, in things like To Africa, which is going to be the first cable, 37,000 kilometers, the first to link east to west, running through the southern part of the continent, the shore around the southern part, or west to east, if you want to look at it that way. I think we're making changes in the foundational structural things that are so important for the continent's future digital development. And then we think about, okay, once we have connectivity and connect more people, and all of us know that we're still not there. I think connectivity is about 34% now. If you look at the EU, they're at 88%, the US high, LATAM high. I think MENA we're second, and it's like 51%. We've got a lot of work to do. But I think we think about what happens then. So how do people use that connectivity to have fun online, which is an important part of life, but also to lead and improve their livelihoods from a health, educational point, business point of view. And then I could speak to the training we deliver. So whether that's Boost with Facebook or She Means Business. I think Boost with Facebook, we're now at 80,000 SMBs trained. If you look at She Means Business, I think we're at 30,000 female entrepreneurs across the continent. I think Nigeria is about 14, South Africa, from my last count, it's about 12, and there's a general program, and we're seeking to expand that this year as well. I think when you look at those investments into the training that we're doing, so people can actually leverage the benefits of the internet, then we're making really, really big strides. And finally, I know I'm well over 2 minutes. I think Facebook, along with many partners, and we have some on the call here, is pushing the envelope. And I think my team plays an important role in working with CSOs and government in co-regulatory relationships to really get the policy environment right, whether it be for cryptocurrencies or innovative connectivity tools, whatever else. And I think that need to continue innovating and to continue creating policy environments that create space for that is really, really important.
That's great. Thank you, Kojo. Would you like to go next?
Sure thing, Samara, I can go next. So just very quick introduction of Flutterwave. We're a payment technology company. We were founded almost 5 years ago, and really we came to market with the idea to build a single platform for digital payments on the African continent. Reason being, digital payments in Africa, highly fragmented. We have over 40 currencies across all our countries. In addition to that, we have over 300 types of digital payments, most of which are not interoperable. So you have a situation where as a business or as an individual, if you're trying to transact within your own country or cross-border, it's a very challenging experience, right? So if I have an e-commerce store, I'm operating out of Kenya, maybe I'm able to reach 90% of my customers in Kenya by integrating the M-Pesa wallet. But when I want to expand to Tanzania and South Africa, I'll run into challenges because I need to then work with more payment service providers to get access to the payment types that my potential customers have. That could be a very complex and challenging process for businesses. So when Flutterwave came to market, it really was and is our mission to bring all these different payment types together onto one platform so that as that e-commerce business, I can work with just Flutterwave and get access to the 13 markets today that we have been fortunate enough to connect, and thereby just reducing the amount of work and the complexities that businesses across the continent have to deal with. One thing that's been very interesting when I think about it from an innovation perspective is we really set out to enable businesses to accept or send payments regardless of payment type, regardless of currency. But what we've seen in recent years is we've actually given rise to innovation. We have a number of fintechs who are now building products on top of our infrastructure. So not just your typical e-commerce business who's looking to sell a good or a service business who's looking to sell services to their customers. We actually now power a number of fintechs who are also then building innovative products that are driving innovation and inclusion, whether it's an app that supports an agent network that then brings banking services or financial services to remote parts of countries across Africa, or whether it's a women-led business that's supporting women and going around providing healthcare services to people in remote areas. It's been really interesting to see what we've built over the last 5 years evolve beyond just help a business accept a payment or send a payment to actually giving rise to the next phase of innovation in fintech and financial inclusion.
That's perfect. Thank you, El. Yamiro, I see we've got you, and I'd like to also hear what Amole is doing to drive innovation and inclusion in Ethiopia and the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Samhar. As you know, we operate in Ethiopia, and our mission and role that we have been playing in the Ethiopian market is identical to what Flutterwave is doing across the continent. When we started about 2.5 years ago in Ethiopia, we were one of the pioneers in terms of bringing in payment and commerce platform to the consumer. And as part of that challenge, e-commerce is very much at its infancy in Ethiopia, not much of startups and so forth. But one of the key things that we brought to the market is bringing in an open API platform that anyone can plug into our platform to orchestrate payments and also consume any of the commerce products, digital products that we have on our platform in their e-commerce apps and anything that they might have out there that they can consume our APIs to monetize it in a white label form. Our goal is we want to connect 25 million of our population into the formal financial sector in the next 5 years. We have over 3 million now consumers and 8,000 merchants and businesses. And we are introducing several products that are key to orchestrate and enhance and enable commerce and transactions in the B2B and C2B market, including credits and as well as bringing in teaming up with different ecosystem players that we call them, that are in the SME, women, rural areas, those kind of things, automating and providing electronic payments, as well as credit, and creating financial inclusion as we go. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Yamito. And Francine, could you please share with us what DMA Global is doing for inclusion and innovation, and also which includes the diaspora focus that I know you have?
Sure. So DMA Global is a UK-based international development consultancy with a global team. Our expertise is in remittances, digital payments, financial inclusion, and diaspora-related affairs. So we work with a number of different development stakeholders, governments, and the private sector on different projects from research to implementation. Currently, we have quite a roster of projects, but Africa specifically, we're working with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, on Prime Africa, that is looking at how to maximize the impact of remittances, specifically looking at 7 countries in depth, with a view to lower cost, increase financial inclusion, and encourage innovation through CFPs that they've actually launched recently. We are also working with the UK government on looking at the UK to Ghana, UK to Nigeria corridors. And then in terms of diaspora, we're working with the African Union and the SIDO and GIZ on diaspora engagement. This is the second stage, looking at how ready governments are to engage with the diaspora and how welcoming of an environment it is. And then we also have been looking at beyond remittances, contributions from the diaspora that are not about that transaction.
That's great. And I think what's really striking about the work you just mentioned is the role of organizations, large and small, and the government's readiness or approach to incentivizing diaspora investments. Okay, well, we've got a few minutes here for a robust conversation around how you see how you foresee the landscape. So first question is, how do you foresee the future of financial and digital inclusion and payments in Africa? And where does gender equity, access, and digital literacy come into this? I invite any of the panelists to take that question.
I can go. So to answer the first part of the question, I think that a lot of private sector companies like Flutterwave, like Moneta Technologies, and the many other companies who are working on payments, financial services, financial inclusion to some extent, have made a lot of progress in the last few years. And I think that we can continue to build on that momentum to continuously drive change on the continent. But I think that in order for us to actually reach critical mass and have true impact on the continent, we need to figure out a way to work hand in hand with the public sector. Because of the nature of access to infrastructure on the African continent today, it can be quite slow to gain critical mass on innovative solutions that are out in market today. And until we figure out a way to work with the public sector, to work with regulators, to work with governments across the different countries, to put some of those infrastructure needs in place, we'll make progress, but not at the level that we can to truly drive change on the continent and to impact all demographics of people, whether it's someone who resides in an urban area or people who reside in villages, women, men. It requires cross collaboration, basically PPPs.
Yes, Sam, I'd like to touch on that. I can't agree more with on the need for to work with the public sector. But I just wanted the second part of the question again, just so I understand it properly.
Yeah, the question, the second part was, how do you foresee the inclusion and digital payments landscape, and where does gender equity, access, and digital literacy come into this?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, I agree with with regard to the digital payments landscape. I mean, I'm generally bullish, but also pragmatic and experienced enough to know that my bullishness about it or my confidence in where it will go has to be tempered a bit. I'll explain what I mean. I think a couple of years ago, if not 18 months ago, it feels like such a long time ago when we were able to travel. I think I was in Rwanda, or I know I was in Rwanda at a conference for everything innovative in tech. I can't remember the name, but the gentleman who arranges it is a friend of mine. He'll be annoyed. But there was an area where we were looking at kind of what entrepreneurs need to get things going. And I happened on one of the rooms and they were talking about where money was flooding into Africa, not flooding in, but coming into Africa, kind of what were PE and other backers or financiers looking at. And it was fintech. And whether that's because of M-Pesa, whether that's because of the growth of crypto, whether it's because we have so much pent up demand on the continent, the money was going to young or relatively young fintech startups. So I think there's a realization that at least in the last 18 months or so, if not longer, that there's an opportunity on the continent. And I think anyone who's lived on the continent or traveled extensively through it knows that there's a huge opportunity with regard to it. So I'm bullish for that reason. And I temper that confidence and bullishness in the fact that, as O intimated, policy and getting the policy right is going to be critically important. How do we grow these small companies, and how do we release the potential of crypto and all sorts of other digital payments, etc., on the continent? And so much the role of policymakers or the public sector in doing that and creating the frameworks for it is really, really important. The second part of the question speaks to gender, and I can't overstate how important it is to understand the gender dynamics as we move the continent forward post-COVID, and the role we must play in ensuring women play a central role in a post-COVID economic recovery, if you want to call it that. I think the stats from the OECD play a really important role in informing us here. I think we know that Africa is hit worst by COVID. I think more businesses closed down more quickly as a result, and that might speak to the nature and the structure of the many economies. But at the same time, women are impacted worse. And I think the stat was like 7% more women closed their businesses down than men, according to the OECD. And for that reason, I think we need to understand gender dynamics are important, especially if we want the whole continent to grow. And at the same time, we need to put more into investing in female entrepreneurs. And that's why I'm proud of the work that Facebook does. As I mentioned before, more than 30,000 female entrepreneurs trained. But at the same time, the way Facebook has pivoted to include financial literacy training in its trainings from henceforth, and a element of financial resilience into that as well. And I think that needs to be part of everybody's thinking. For female entrepreneurs, I think that needs to be part of everybody's thinking as we move forward. Sorry to take so long to answer, but I did want to unpack that for people.
Oh, I think that's great. Anyone else?
If I may, the African continent is a very good case study. Recently the World Bank Findex financial inclusion data published that over 34% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa, adults have account. And when you look at that 34%, 45% of that has mobile money account. When you compare that to the rest of the world, which is at 2%. So when you look at that, Africa has made a huge stride in terms of achievement in a very short period of time. And that short period of time we're talking about is less than a decade and a half. So this impressive financial innovation and inclusion is very much measurable in a way that people have been financially included, and some of this is coming into the different rural communities. So, when we are talking about trying to connect 25 million people of our population in Ethiopia, we cannot do that alone, nor can this be done in isolation or in a vacuum. We have to be able to partner with the private sector, the NGOs, governments alike. And in order for this, it has to work, it has to have a win-win partnership in a continuous innovation that effective localized solutions have to be created and rolled out in scale. When we look at this, as our company is concerned, this has become our DNA to work in partnership with a lot of other that would come, whether it is in the public sector, private, and so forth. So in this particular scenario, if you look at partnerships across Africa or anywhere else, we look at partnering with, whether it is Visa for online payments, we're doing Flutterwave remittances with Flutterwave. We are joining with other, East African banks to do microcredit, credit analysis and credit scoring, and bringing this thing into the community where we might not have all those technologies, but we have to bring in the technologies, the innovations and so forth, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel and bring it into our communities. And by doing so, when you are talking about gender equity and access and so forth, all those technologies that and innovations, if we don't bring them and introduce them and to our communities in the rural areas, whether that is women that are doing last mile distribution of fast moving consumer products, and we are financing them through credit. And these women cannot be employed, or they don't have any way of making money in their rural communities. But by having that last mile distribution capability and accepting money in electronic form and giving them credit, we are bringing them into a formal financial inclusion. And those part of things require that regulation changes, policy changes, government involvement, creating infrastructure in the rural areas, creating reach, and so forth. So, when it comes to everything else, I think that partnership and policies and working together as fintechs and banks and so forth is key into this sector.
Yeah, Miru, you're reading my mind, and I'm going to ask Francine to kind of do a hybrid answer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you see the landscape for financial inclusion, but also with a slight focus on the opportunities and challenges we have with sub-Saharan African governments, readiness or willingness to be innovative. I know that you've spent time looking at government policies a bit from a diaspora perspective, but if you could just kick us off. This is kind of merging the last question and going into the next question.
So I completely agree with the other panelists. We're only going to move forward through collaborating, and it's different to a lot of things that people have done before. So the change is hard, but I think keep on pushing forward, and I'm seeing more and more of that collaboration. In terms of the payment landscape, I would say that the pieces around education and financial literacy kind of underpin all the work and innovation that everybody's doing. People have to understand what is available, why it's available. There is also having to understand what it is that they need, which again, there could be a lot more demand side research done to understand that. So I think mainly the key is data, to be honest. Data from central banks, data from the diaspora, making sure that everyone's involved in the conversation, and that we allow an achievable level of transparency so that people are aware of what's going on, why it's going on, and there's nothing hidden for them.
Tell us a little bit about how you see the landscape with government's role in public-private partnerships in helping either drive that transparency, or how you've seen the appetites across the different countries that you've been able to work on.
So I think that the appetite is large. I think that I'll speak to remittances. Remittances are really where the diaspora really comes to the conversation, where the focus has always been, but remittances tend to be a transaction from A to B. There isn't a lot to be gained off the back of that. So I think that they need to see the diaspora as that partner as well in that partnership. Governments are open and willing to work with the diaspora, and SIDO have, with from the African Union support, they have I think 45 countries in Africa now have a diaspora focal point. So it's something that's high on the agenda and people want to learn more. Some of the work we're doing on diaspora engagement involves training some of these diaspora focal points and some of the high level officials, whether it be diaspora or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to help them understand the changes they need to make, to share good practice and to just keep that kind of engagement going.
That's great. And I want to open up the same question to the rest of the panel. How does Africa continue to develop its digital economy through innovation? And what are SSA governments doing specifically to help drive innovation?
If you want me to go, I can.
I'll leave it to anyone. Just don't, whoever.
Okay. Let me talk specifically from the Ethiopia, and there are 4 different points that the government is doing. One is regulation. When COVID came in March of last year, we were in a very much stagnant in terms of where we are heading with digital and the whole fintech and so forth. As soon as the COVID hit, regulations became very important to enable a lot of the, so some of the regulation that came to play was payment instrument issuers, payment processors, electronic transactions, agent banking. So a whole slew of about 8 different regulations were enacted in a very quick manner in a matter of 2 months that changed the landscape completely in Ethiopia. As part of that, there is also the privatization and liberalization of the telecom sector. And this is expected to bring more competition, quality of service, lower cost of access, and access and reach for the population. This also is a huge, because we are a monopoly from a telecom perspective, and this is going to bring in a lower cost of access to technology. Third, opening on of the financial market to foreign investment, that is something that is going to come soon. However, at least from a non-financial institution like fintech, there was a regulation that has been acted so that fintechs, at its minimally, but at least they can participate in the financial sector. And now fintechs are acknowledged by the government to participate because they see that fintechs can bring in innovation and bring in a very stagnant economy into overdrive. The other thing that is very critical, and I think this is not only in Ethiopia, but the rest of Africa as well, is the national ID, lack of national ID, and lack of credit bureaus and so forth. And as part of this financial inclusion and, trying to offer credits and all those different things, identifying, fulfilling KYC is a big issue. Creating an account.
KYC?
KYC, know your customer data, basically full information of the customer. That is, it's in the US and everywhere else, we have a social security and you can pull everyone, any person's information. But in Africa and specifically in Ethiopia, we don't have national ID. So since we don't have any national ID, we cannot create a credit bureau, or we cannot create an easy way of identifying a person. So those kind of regulations and things that the government can do in the continent would help in terms of financial inclusion and the ability to offer additional financial products on top of the usual suspects in terms of wallet and all those different things.
That is fascinating, and the kind of examples I think sometimes we don't always consider from at least in the diaspora, some of the basic mechanics that are still missing to help drive business and growth. Something as simple as a national ID or the establishment of bureaus through national policy. Do you want to get into this at all, maybe from a Pan-African level?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something that Yemiru mentioned briefly. I think speaking about the Ethiopian government specifically, Flutterwave and Yemiru's company, Moneta Technologies, have been working together over the last year with the support and blessing of the financial in Ethiopia. We will very soon be launching a service that will help us drastically crash the cost of sending remittances into Ethiopia. I think that is a fantastic example of how the government is contributing and how other governments can contribute. In countries like Nigeria, we've also seen the central bank create a regulatory sandbox where fintech are allowed to come not only demo, but basically build their products and have the regulatory free will per se to basically experiment with products that they're trying to launch in the country before needing to go through the very extensive and complicated process of obtaining regulatory approval. I think that if more governments on the continent can borrow from some of these initiatives by the Central Bank of Nigeria and the National Bank of Ethiopia, I think that we definitely will see a lot of progress in financial inclusion. One thing that's really big for me that I unfortunately don't have examples of on the continent, that's not to say they don't exist, I'm just not aware of any. When you look at funding for fintechs in Africa, a lot of the funding that back fintechs in Africa come from outside of Africa. And with that comes a little bit of pressure, right, to return, basically to show ROIs to investors who, yes, may be supportive of what you're trying to build on the continent, but may not have the full picture of how things actually function on the continent. So that might drive a company to focus on innovations that's targeted at middle and high income individuals across countries, as opposed to really helping drive innovation towards the people who today do not have access to the financial infrastructure or to solutions that can help solve the problems of access or identification, like Yemiru has mentioned. And yes, I know there are NGOs out there who are playing in that space, but I think if governments can work together to come up with like real funding to back up companies who are really interested in going beyond just the high and middle class earners on the continent, I think that we'll see a lot of progress on the financial inclusion mandates as well.
Great points. Semar, can I just come in? I first of all really appreciate being on this panel and hearing from experts and leaders in this field. I've really enjoyed it. I think it's important to say that actually we don't see, when you look at a Pan-African view of things, we see difference and disparity in the region, where there are some forward-thinking governments, in my view, those who really want to embrace this, who even when they're not quite sure about something, will take the step of creating a sandbox, like O said, or will take the step in Ethiopia of trying to crash, as O described it, and Yemiru gave a good description of what's happening there as well, to try and get things moving. But at the same time, we're seeing governments in many parts of the continent who are taking what I call regressive steps and sometimes temporary measures. And I could go on listing them. But even if you think about internet shutdowns, for example, which we saw across the continent, to me, that shutdowns undermine the very thing that makes people willing to invest, believe in tech, rely on tech and fintech. It takes away confidence in those services and the utility of those services being there all the time. And I think when we think about, as Facebook, when we think about, right, what's most important for getting people to invest, to believe in tech, it's confidence, like in any sector, confidence that confidence in what will happen tomorrow. If we all knew what would happen tomorrow, we would all be, many of us wouldn't even be on this call, we'd probably be billionaires somewhere. And I think when you take away, hopefully, and I think if you take away that ability to plan effectively and to execute, and I keep coming back to policy and making sure people have a clear kind of route or roadmap to where they're going, I think that undermines everything. So I do want to make it clear that some governments, some countries are moving forward in that respect, but we also see some governments and some countries taking regressive steps with regard to giving our sector the foundation and the surety it needs to move forward.
That's great. I think the point around customer confidence is huge, and the trust in institutions that they'll not only withstand the crises, but that they will continue to be consistently available and make their services consistently available is so critical for the continent. I want to open it up to audience questions now, noting that the time, we just have a few minutes left, but we're going to try and do as many as possible. Great questions from the audience. I think these are going to be really interesting. First one is, what would be your suggestions or plan on how to include the rural areas to participate in the fintech space and have access to digital payments? So very interesting to hear approaches or thoughts around reaching rural areas. I think all of you are doing something in one capacity or another to address the gap and the needs of rural users. I'm going to open it up. Let me see. I think all of you are doing something around.
Yeah, I'm gonna let the guys working with fintech day to day answer. I think I would point to connectivity. I think O gave a great example of how patient capital, when we're thinking about rural areas, especially the most remote, is so important. So I'll just put those two things in. I think we're certainly thinking about connecting rural dwellers, and we're certainly thinking about what patient capital looks like, and encouraging investors to think of Africa in a different way when it comes to rural communities.
Yeah, I can touch on a little bit of what Flutterwave is doing. Obviously, being a company that focuses on enabling digital payments, we tend to target businesses and individuals that are in more developed parts of Africa, just based on the nature of the services we offer. You need access to internet, you need access to a device that can enable you to make a payment or accept payments. But one of the things that we've started doing as we expand our base in countries is to go back and come up with a solution that can actually help reach people in rural areas. Nigeria being our largest and first most experienced market, naturally became the first place for us to deploy a pilot for the product. And basically what we are doing is building an agent network that will provide financial services to people who live in remote areas and are potentially 10 miles or 10 kilometers away from the nearest ATM. Basically, we work with our banking partners across the country to provision agents, or like your typical neighborhood mom and pop stores, with access to devices that they can use to help people either deposit funds into an account, withdraw funds into an account, get access to cash, receive remittances, mostly domestic remittances. Say someone is sending money from Lagos to a village in Ogun State, for example. So we started to experiment with solutions like that. And I think it's crucial to note that to really be successful with those types of solutions, you actually have to play the digital game first, right? You have to figure out how payments work in the country. You have to figure out how to reach the people who already are banked or have some sort of access to the financial ecosystem before you can sort of begin to backward integrate and pilot to see how you can actually drive more financial inclusion across countries.
That's great, thank you. Another question, a question from Nana on the diaspora. We are increasingly seeing members of the diaspora being transnational, working in the UK, Europe, and the US, but also exploring or launching businesses targeting the African consumer. My question is, are we catering to this segment of the diaspora with innovation at the moment? If so, can we share examples? And if not, what barriers are preventing real innovation in this space? Francine, can you kick that off?
Sure. I think that relationship needs to be looked at and focused on. I think that often that diaspora can be not an afterthought, but it's taking so long. But by the time you get to the diaspora, it maybe isn't as thorough or as impactful as we would like. I think that again, you need to see them as a partner, and that should be the focus of the engagement. How do we partner with them, and how can they continue to influence Africa? I think that, I'll say again that they need to be seen as that key stakeholder. They're often the initiator of any payments that are going to Africa. They're often the decision maker. We wouldn't be able to innovate without them. And no one should innovate in isolation. So I think bringing them in as the main partner and that focus being there is great. In terms of what governments are doing, Morocco recently launched an online platform for the diaspora to help speed up like admin services. And so I'm to see a lot more of that, finding online platforms for the diaspora to engage, to find out, and that kind of push and pull of data, not only getting information from the diaspora, but also governments giving the diaspora information to build that trust and to make them feel comfortable.
That's great. Anyone else on diaspora insights, incentives for diasporas? I will say from my own role, I'll step out of my moderator role very briefly. Given the fact that diasporas have been so organically influential on the continent through all the different ways we've highlighted already, we have seen a huge uptick in governments taking initiative to develop national policies geared to attract diaspora investment. And investment can mean many things, in addition to financial, social investments, and economic investments of all kinds. The spectrum varies, unfortunately, in what investment means to the governments. So there are quite a few also experts on the call. I want to give a shout out to Martin Russell, who's been sharing insights on the chat. But what we do see is a willingness and a desire to figure out entry points and pathways to bring diasporas more close to solutions on the ground. And that includes whether it's diaspora bonds or investments or being able to own property and open up businesses, to more social issues of having dual citizenship, being able to vote. The spectrum across the continent varies. From our lens, we do know that there are at least 45 African countries with diaspora initiatives or policies in some shape or form. The challenge is, I think what we've highlighted here is how that translates into the tech and digital space. And as Kojo and Yamir have alluded to, as all our panelists have alluded to, that is where the biggest work, the biggest gap exists in helping these governments as partners see the opportunities in the tech and digital world for diaspora engagement. So for Facebook, we're at the forefront of those conversations, working with governments and non-governmental stakeholders to really help them see the benefits of not just our product, but the tech platforms, the digital platforms, and the benefits of that from the transnational users, as Nana has correctly identified.
Yeah, I thought Nana's question was great, and I wasn't going to overstep the mark and speak to what Facebook is doing on diaspora. I think we're one of the few policy teams that has a diaspora lead and a diaspora team, which speaks to how important we find it is and think it is. I think diaspora, more than anything else, want to be listened to, and I think that's a challenge since time immemorial. Certainly, I'm old enough to remember hearing complaints that, you know, we want to go back home, give back home, influence back home, but there was no interface or no effective interface to do that. I think the stat that you and Francine have shared about 45 countries having these policies or points of presence that are looking at this is a really, really important step forward in that listening exercise, that dialogue.
Thank you, Kojo. Just in the couple of minutes we have remaining, let me fit one more question in. Well, I think maybe we'll end up being over time, so we've got 8 minutes left. Could we just, I'd like to invite the panelists to share some closing thoughts on the topic and our discussion, and anything you'd like to leave the audience with before we wrap it up for a summary. Let me start with, I'm going to do it alphabetical again. Let's close it out alphabetically, and I too share the last name that starts with an A, so I feel for you as well.
No worries at all. Thank you so much for having Flutterwave represented on this panel. We love to be a part of these discussions. We're very committed to innovation and inclusion on the continent. My parting words would just be, it's not, I know we talk about financial inclusion a lot, and that sometimes can make it seem as though the onus lies on individuals and companies that operate within the financial sector. But in reality, there's so much more that could be done by individuals and entities outside the financial sector. I know we touched on the issue of identification earlier, so that we can properly KYC the people that we're providing services to. There are so many other things, such as even physical infrastructure, right? Flutterwave recently launched an e-commerce platform in light of COVID called Flutterwave Stores. We observed a lot of our small businesses who operated physical business locations having to shut down, and basically going from having revenues one day to not having any revenues or employees the next day. So we built this e-commerce platform that allows them to digitize their businesses in under 5 minutes, right? So you go online, you create this e-commerce store, we provide you with a URL that essentially serves as your website. You can direct your customers to place orders from there. It comes fully integrated with inventory management, with payments, with logistics. The thing is, it's really hard to deploy the logistics part across all the countries, right? So needing to find partners who have deepened logistic networks across countries. It might not seem as though that's immediately connected to payments, but when we start to think of providing holistic solutions that can actually help businesses on the continent scale or bring more people into the financial ecosystem, it really does truly require collaboration from people across the financial sector, across the logistics sector, across very many different sectors. So just a plea to everyone to continue to think of ways that you can innovate and contribute to the development of our continent.
Thank you so much, El. And next we have friend Kojo, and then Yamiru. You're on mute, Kojo.
as I started, I'll finish, I guess. So as I said, it's always good to unmute. First of all, massive thanks to the panel. I think we had 100 and something people on at one point. We're around 60 now. So in fact, massive thanks to the panelists and all of those who participated, especially those who are still here. I think we've heard a lot of great things today. I have to say, I have a bias in that I believe in the inherent innovation, problem solving. Thanks, Bashir. Believe in the innovation, problem solving ability, entrepreneurship, confidence and hope of Africa and Africans. I have a bias in that view. And I think that's what makes certainly my team and Facebook confident about the future of the continent and where it's going from a tech development point of view. And hopefully I've been able at the very start to put that confidence across. I think I spoke to the huge investment into Africa. I think I spoke to the 100,000 plus, if not more, people that we've trained in order to use the connectivity that Facebook and partners are bringing. And I think that speaks to the confidence we have in the future and giving people the ability to use connectivity once they get it. I think we've also touched on the need for partnership. And I think we throw out the term PPP a lot of the time. And I think often there's a conversation between policymaker and business or business and civil society, and rarely done well, policymaker, civil society and business. And I think we really need to drill down on that conversation, as well as other dialogues between the diaspora and African governments and other stakeholders, for etc. And I think we do need to be really deliberate about that. And I think we need to be deliberate about that because I think that creates better policy, it creates better legislation, it creates better regulation that underpins much of what we're trying to achieve. And I think the risk is when we don't get that policy, legislation and regulation right, we lose the kind of confidence or roadmap, surety and roadmap for how we move forward. And I think, again, O touched on a great point that even when we're unsure of what that policy, legislation and regulation should look like, and there is no need to be ashamed of being unsure in a digital world because innovation moves so fast, we can find innovative public policy steps, whether it be sandboxes or whatever else, to try and test our theories and assumptions of what we should be doing. And I think that's the kind of thing I'd like to leave people with. And just to say again, thank you ever so much for this conversation. I've really appreciated it.
Thank you so much, Kojo. We're really happy to have your perspectives and our Africa team represented with your insights. And I just want to close it out with Francine. Any closing words from you? You know what? I skipped. Oh, this should have been easy. A, B, C, D. My apologies, Yamiro. Please.
No problem. Shall I go?
Yes, please,
Okay.
please.
Well, departing comments in terms of this panel. One thing is evident here. Maybe everyone thinks in the rest of the world that Africa is just one country, but we have over 50 countries in Africa, and it's huge and very diverse. And every country is not at the same stage in terms of evolution when it comes to digital and to all aspects. Case in point, we look at Ethiopia today. Ethiopia today is 12 years ago in Nigeria and 10 years ago in Egypt and so forth. And some of the things that the challenges that we face, it's not the same as what we are facing in Kenya or what we are facing in Rwanda. So some of the challenges and some of the solutions are not a cookie cutter across the continent. And every one of them brings in challenges. And some of the challenges are countrywide challenges that you have to solve in order to launch your product and be able to reach the rural area. Whether that is infrastructure, whether that is technology-oriented infrastructure, or it could be investment, it could be all those different things that the spectrum of things that could come to play. So, my take is that, dealing with Africa, it's not a cookie cutter approach, but every country has its own challenges, and that no one solution is going to be able to fit every one of us, the countries. And we need to look at and learn from each other. And what has worked in one, maybe it needs to be a localized solution from tailor it and localize it and provide that solution. And partnership, learning from one another, and working and not to reinvent the wheel over and over again. And I think if we do those things, we will catch in terms of the wave and be able to come stronger. However, if we go in the direction of reinventing the wheel or trying to do it on our own in isolation, that also brings us, down and not achieve our objectives. So thank you for having us, for having me, and having Amole in this discussion. We really enjoyed it, and hopefully this is helpful for everyone that has participated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miro. And last but certainly not least, Francine, please share your thoughts.
So yeah, thank you to ADM and Facebook for putting on this event. It's been great. I agree with all the panelists. I think that the way forward is collaboration, partnership. I think the roadmap is different for every country, and we should learn from good practice, but be specific when dealing with particular diaspora. I think that another good aspect from the pandemic is the digital habits that have been formed in both diaspora and in Africa. So I would hope that we'd be able to leverage off the back of that. And then I just want some more continued transparent engagement. And I would say that even with researchers like DMAG, so if myself or one of my colleagues ever contact you, I'd hope that you guys would be willing to speak to us, because the research that we do, we're really passionate about it. And our idea is always to push the agenda forward in Africa.
I love that. And thank you for showing another positive aspect of the pandemic is increased new digital habits. I think that's huge. You're absolutely right. I have never communicated more with my family members, oh my gosh, through WhatsApp and video calls than during this pandemic, which is wonderful. They're amazing, but that's fantastic. So huge takeaways in this conversation. And what I will say is we know that there's a lot more room for opportunity and ideas than there are barriers. It's really interesting that so much of this is the devil is in the details and in the specificity of the country, a market, or a specific diaspora. I am hearing most interesting for me is the emphasis on needing to commit to focus on one aspect of the business ecosystem, whether it's logistics or operability or issues around policy and regulatory frameworks, or providing data for research purposes. There's so much groundwork to be done to drive the financial inclusion space and help develop Africa's fintech ecosystem. I want to thank the panelists for their amazing insights and time. I want to thank the audience for staying with us. Kojo, I counted, we had 165 people, and we have a pretty strong turnout, which is wonderful. But I especially want to give a huge thank you and congratulations to the African Diaspora Network, and specifically to Almaz, who has run this organization from start to finish, built an incredible community, a global community. And because of her vision and leadership, she has opened the door and widened the space for more diaspora contributions, for more African contributions, and for more focus on Africa's growth and opportunity with friends all over the world. Thank you, Almaz, and thank you for letting Facebook be a part of today's conversation.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Samhar. I was just sitting here and gloating in each and every one of you, and so much takeaway. And I know that you will see Megan will do a great job. Megan and Deborah are writing the notes, and we'll share with you what we've heard, but also what the takeaway are. But I just want to say that, Francine, the one thing you said that I think is very important, and I'm sure you've said many things and all of you said a lot, but no one should innovate in isolation. And if we can stop that, and I think what you're saying and the way I took it is we need to trust and build that community together. We cannot hoard innovation. Whatever ideas we have, the more we hoard it, the less it becomes useful. And I think this comes out of lack of relationship building, lack of community building, and lack of trust building. What I think the diaspora, and I've heard from all of you, and somehow this is her life, she's been doing it for a long time, through her ability to bring women diasporans together. This job is not for us Africans alone to solve it, and which is what is ADN trying to do. We are a network of Africans and friends of Africa. We do not hold the answer, but what we hold is each other. And I think the more we involve other people to our journey, the better it is. I think we started the day with hearing the journey from E, and I do hope some of these entrepreneurs who are trying to, who are aspiring to start their own business, to really listen carefully and see what he has gone through. And one point I took from him is the importance of building relationship, network, and trust. And that's what is going to get us further. The other thing I took, and I think this is very critical, and this is primarily goes to what Samhar is talking about and what Facebook is trying to do on the policy side. The governments of Africa have the responsibility to create an ecosystem that's enabling for the Africans to really contribute to what they can, but also for us, the diasporans, to continue to support the continent, not only through remittances. Remittances is one thing, and we will always do it. But actually, how do we scale up remittances and take a little bit of our savings into investment? Where we invest, whether it's Future Africa or other investment portfolios, that's something to be explored. And the only way we could do that also is by working together. So all I'm trying to say is we are where we are because of all of you, and because you trusted us too to be 10 years and moving on and continue to go. It's persistence, and it's also faith in you, faith in each other, and faith in ourselves. And I think this is very critical. I want to thank the Silicon Valley Corporation, starting from Facebook, for believing in us. This lead big funder that we have, one of the largest contribution, which I'll share on the 23rd. I wanted to share today, but the press release is not out, but you all will be happy when you hear it. We are going to start a program that will enable Africans from the diaspora and also us, the contemporary, but also our brothers and sisters from the historical diaspora. Remember, I am where I am simply because other African Americans have suffered for years and years for us. So that program is to help 15 to 20 entrepreneurs to get through training. I reach out to all of you through individual emails, but also through our newsletter and social media, because we would like you to help us nominate the next 15 to 20 entrepreneurs. We have a challenge seed funding of 20,000 that we have to go and raise another 180,000. That's at least my wish, to make sure that these entrepreneurs get some seed funding when they leave the program. So with that, I want to thank you all, Samhar, Nicole. I wanted to say Francine, Kojo, and O, and Yamiru from Ethiopia. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great day. We do have, for those of you who are willing to stay, we're very happy to continue the conversation through the the networking opportunity. You've got half an hour. You can stay, but for those of you who cannot stay, I just want to say thank you and have a wonderful day, evening, and afternoon.